Can the Jazz be better than we think this year, and how would that occur? Find out next on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. I'm excited as always to be with you guys. I'm Leif Thulin, happy to fill in for David Locke on Locked On Jazz. You guys know me by now, but I'm a lifelong Jazz fan, credentialed NBA draft analyst for Locked On NBA Big Board, attendee of the 2023 and 2024 NBA Draft Combine, Utah Jazz broadcast assistant and statistician the past 3 seasons and soon to be a 4th season. Gosh, I can't wait for Jazz basketball. I'm excited for hockey too because it's new to me, but I'll tell you what, I can't wait for Jazz basketball. It always makes me happy this time of year. I know everyone's talking about football. I'm talking about Jazz basketball. And don't expect all the geeky numbers of usual to be gone because I love me some stats, but I'll also give you a unique perspective of seeing a lot of these players for years, not just the NBA players, but the college guys. And even when they're in high school, I watch way too much basketball. I'm happy to share all of that with you guys. Thanks for making Locked On Jazz your first listen each and every day. And remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is comment anything below. And today's question is, who will be the next Olympian for the Utah Jazz? And if you say Lowry, come up with a second place one in case Finland does qualify. Today's episode is sponsored by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And it doesn't have to just be for the NBA. I got U.S. Open tickets on Gametime, and I had a wonderful experience there. So today, first segment, I'll examine how that can occur that the Jazz overachieve. How it occurs, I'll go through that. Second segment, I'll give my personal opinion on what the Jazz's record will be, what it will look like, and will the Jazz overachieve, or will they exceed expectation? Maybe they'll be at the expectation, which is set as 29.5 wins by Las Vegas. And then the third segment, which Jazz player can be an Olympian in 2028 and how that would occur. So let's dive right in. The way the Jazz can overachieve is the Jazz win home games against teams that have less interest in winning. Let's be frank. The Jazz are probably 13th or 14th most talented team in the West. That's the way I see it. I'd say 14th, frankly. And then you play a lot of those really good teams early in the season. Well, not all of them are going to be as motivated to go play the Utah Jazz. We've seen, and I'll bemoan this, we've seen a lot of stars. LeBron, Steph, Kevin Durant, Devin Booker. Teams that come to Utah don't always play their stars, and it sucks because we're fans. We want to see them play. But I'm not saying that's the way the Jazz overachieve because that's not a good way to have a diet of a way to win a game is relying on them not to bring their A game. But I think that some of these teams that the Jazz play so often, so regularly to start the season will have their expectations to be playoff teams, and therefore their motivation is to peak at the right time. And therefore, when they play the Jazz, the motivation isn't as high as when they go play the Nuggets, likely on the same road trip. They also want to take care of business at certain times. So when they go on the road and they play a bad team like the Jazz, motivation will be lower. The Jazz overachieve by beating enough teams that take them for granted. My dad, for the longest time growing up, told me anybody can beat anybody on any given night in the NBA. And it's most true in the NBA versus other leagues. That and baseball. Well, the Jazz are one of those teams that you have to, if you're the Jazz, you have to think you can win these games. And that's how they overachieve. They overachieve by winning games against teams that are more talented than they are by trying harder. Now, let me give you the basketball tactics as to how they're going to win these games if they do overachieve. Well, Will Hardy's the second reason as to why I think the Jazz could overachieve. I'm not going to say I believe this will occur, but the question is, can they overachieve and how would it happen? Well, Will Hardy, I don't think anyone expected in year one the Jazz to start 10-3. I don't think anyone expected last year the Jazz to be 500 through 52 games, leading them to a very good record in a competitive Western Conference, one of the most competitive Western Conferences since about 2008, 2009, where all the teams had 50 wins. Since 2015, where the top 6 seeds, or 2 through 7, were separated by a game. Like, that's how great the conferences were back then. It was close last year to that level. I think it's going to be even better this year. Well, Will Hardy had the Jazz at 500 through 52 games last year. That's really hard to do. Pretty darn impressive, honestly. So how did they do that last year? Well, the Jazz played harder for 48 minutes than their opposition. What does that mean? Yeah, they played harder for a game. I get it. Well, you may say, well, that's not sustainable, but Hardy found a way to get the Jazz to 500 last year, 26 and 26 through 52 games by taking out THT of the lineup. THT started, then didn't play for a period, and so I don't want to not mention that, but I also don't want to disparage his name. I don't want to trash that now that he's not on the Jazz, but he didn't help the Jazz win. He was taken out of the lineup. But more importantly, the Jazz played 240 minutes of basketball. What's 240 minutes? Well, that's 48 times 5. You need 5 players to play 48 minutes. The Jazz essentially said that their 10 men, that the Jazz came up with lineup computations to have 10 men play, was better than the way the other team's 7 or 8 played. And the Jazz overachieved. This notion has mattered more in the college game typically. It's been like Florida State. Leonard Hamilton famously stated, my 5 may not be as good as your 5, but my 12 can beat your 5. And Florida State for a while was excellent at doing this. The Jazz could come out this year emulating what they did in their best stretch last season and play with more fire and with more players, thus better legs, more energy, meaning they win the energy battle, they win the 50-50 balls, they win the home games, spurred on by the crowd, and therefore they overachieve. The Jazz will have 10 players playing regularly in their rotation, at least the way I foresee it, even before this notion comes into play. And many of those players are going to be eager to prove what they can do. And some of them are serious reclamation projects and vets looking to improve their standing, whether it's to be traded or to improve their stock. Kessler, reclamation project. Just had a bad year last year after an excellent rookie year. Sophomore slump. He wants to prove it's real. John Collins, is he going to be on the Jazz? Well, maybe if he plays well, he can find a suitor that wants him. Jordan Clarkson could be a really interesting player to monitor around the trade deadline because there's going to be teams that need scoring. Or does Jordan Clarkson love Utah enough but just wants to play better because he had a really inefficient season last year? Colin Sexton, I've talked about how much he wants to prove how good he is, that last year's efficiency as a top 30 player is not a fluke. Keontae wants to prove that he can play the point guard and he can put up those 17 points per game that Basketball Reference and their analytics model project him to score per game, and that he can be a point guard of the future per Danny Ainge's question. Well, that means the Jazz, if all those things happen, or even some, maybe most of those things happen, the Jazz are better than the anticipated, which is a foregone conclusion that the Jazz are in the top 5 of the draft by Jazz fans. Statistically, it says the Jazz will get 29.5 wins. I don't think the Jazz quite are the 8th worst team based on paper. I think they're a little lower, like I said, talent-wise. But I can see how. Will Hardy's overachieved each year. He's so almost too good of a coach at times for the Jazz that it's hurt their draft stock. That's how they could overachieve. Interestingly, the Jazz have a lot of home games to start the year against many teams that have long-term winning goals, but perhaps less interest in playing the Jazz. And, early in the season is when you can beat teams. The Jazz beat the champion Denver Nuggets that first year of Will Hardy, and they beat the brakes off of them in the opening game. The Jazz play winning teams to start the year, and those teams need to coalesce. They need to gel. We've also seen stars skip, like I mentioned, and the Jazz fans have won us many a game. We've all been there, and it's loud in this arena. Jazz fans love basketball. So that's how the Jazz can overachieve. You have Colin Sexton, you have Keontae George, you have Kessler, John Collins, Clarkson. Some of these guys have better seasons than they had last year. Energy and effort put forth by 10 players. Like rookies are going to be desperate to prove that they belong. Taylor Hendricks is going on a show that last year's last 2 months were what he is as opposed to the first 5 before that. His numbers jumped drastically. They were significantly better. So there's going to be so many players with motivation, a lot of energy, youthful team. That's how the Jazz overachieve, is they win early when teams aren't quite ready for what the Utah Jazz are. I don't think anyone actually believes the Jazz can be playoff contenders, but they can be better than the foregone conclusion of, sell it in, we're going to lose every night. That's all I'm saying. You could say this about a lot of teams. The Pistons, for instance. Cade Cunningham plays, and they're a far better team than what they were. Are they going to win a championship? No. But are they as bad as what they were last year when they became a meme? No, absolutely not. When Cade Cunningham plays, you got a real chance. Coming up next, I'll give my assessment of if we can overachieve or not. And how would those things occur? if they were to occur, what does it look like on a schedule? I'll give my truthful, honest prediction of what the Utah Jazz look like next year, coming up next. I love going to sporting events. I truly do. I don't like to spend my money, but sporting events are what I splurge on. And Game Time has made me feel less guilty for spending that money because they have great deals and great seats. So I don't spend as much and I get in a great experience. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats. So you don't have to waste the time searching through thousands of tickets to find the good deal. It's right there on Game Time. Game Time's even got a 50% off Labor Day offer for the Diamondbacks and Dodgers. And both teams right now are balling out in the NL West. Fabulous deal. Look into the NL West and look at the Padres, the Dodgers, and the Diamondbacks. And if you can catch any of those guys, I highly recommend it in September baseball heading into October. So there are some fabulous deals, and the prices get even cheaper the closer it gets to game time on Game Time. You just choose your seat at a game or a concert, and make sure to use my personal favorite feature and what will become your favorite feature, enabling you to have a panoramic view of your seat and to know exactly what you'll be seeing. You don't want a big pole in your way at a baseball game. You want to make sure you can see exactly what you'll be seeing and have a great view of the entire field. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app and create an account and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Also, let me tell you about Intercap Lending. It's one of the largest independent lending companies in America. It's hyper responsive, so much so it's different than anyone else. They embrace change, grow as the years have gone on. They know what works for each customer, and there's so many testimonials of excellent experience from all the borrowers. And it's a direct issuer, but it's so good it makes you feel like it's a small company, just a local brand. No, au contraire, 44 states feature Intercap Lending. Intercap Lending thrives in all 44 states, not just Utah, but it makes you feel like it's a small brand because of how well they take care of you and how well they know you. You get to service your own loan, build long-term relationships, and it's been proven this is better for the consumer. Steve Carter is our personal loan officer for Locked On Jazz, so call him at 385-800-8528 and make sure to tell him you're on Locked On and you listen to Locked On Jazz and get the corporate discount. Intercap Lending, NMLS number 190465. For more information, visit intercaplending.com. Welcome back, but thank you guys for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. And for your second listen, enjoy Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA. Available on YouTube or wherever you prefer to get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Alrighty, welcome back to Locked On Jazz. Leif Thulin with you here. And I'm going to give you my honest assessment of how the Jazz will fare as opposed to why they could overachieve, which was the pitch last segment. I think the Jazz will not overachieve wins-wise, but maybe in terms of individuals. And it's less to do with the Jazz and more to do with the schedule / team aspirations. The schedule is brutal, especially at crucial points to when you build those wins. You like to either start well or finish well, and the Jazz have brutal schedules at the beginning and end of the season. And then at the end of the season, you may not want to win if the Jazz are not in the position to do so at that point because Cooper Flagg could be awaiting. So let's investigate. The Jazz open up. I mentioned this. They play a lot of Western Conference powers. They open up with 6 straight Western Conference opponents right off the jump, beginning with 2 in a row versus hungry teams looking to make leaps in the Grizzlies and the Warriors. They also play the Nuggets, the Spurs, teams like that. Those teams won't be overlooking the Jazz because they missed out on the playoffs in the case of the Grizzlies and the Warriors. The Spurs are looking to improve with Chris Paul joining forces with Victor Wembanyama, with Stephon Castle grooming along in the wings. These are all great things happening in the Western Conference. Not great for the Jazz, but great for basketball. So that jumps out because the West was really good last year and only figures to be better, despite a pick like Cooper Flagg looming as a reward for tanking. The incentive for tanking is higher with Cooper Flagg. And I've talked about it numerous times that teams have already arranged their season to be less good because of how well Cooper Flagg played at Team USA scrimmages. Well, here's the other part of why I think the Jazz probably don't overachieve. It's not just the Cooper Flagg sweepstakes. The Jazz, by my estimations, will only be favored 2 times until December. And that's both times against Wembanyama and the Spurs at home. They play 3 times, 2 of which are at home. And I think those are going to be slightly favoring the Jazz. I'm not saying the Jazz only win twice until December. Like that'd be ludicrous. But I think they're only statistically favored in those games. That's how hard the schedule is. That's a ton of games and very few wins. That brings me to the hockey part of things. I mentioned that hockey at the outset. I'll be working a little bit on stats, got my schedule recently, and there's a lot of games that happen for both. Well, they both can't be in Utah at the same time. That means the Jazz will be on the road quite frequently. The Jazz will not have a regular season, non-part of the in-season tournament game from December 1st to December 28th. They have one game that'll be at the Delta Center. That'll be part of the in-season tournament, but in that entire span. That's 27 days in one game where they play in Utah. So that's hard to win right there. That's discouraging. It also means that they're probably going to play the youthful pieces sooner because you start poorly, you start playing younger players because your expectations go out the door, trades begin to happen. We saw this a couple of years ago when the Jazz started to go south. You saw Beasley and Conley get traded and then insert Ochai Agbaji more minutes. Last year, you saw Taylor Hendricks start to get more minutes by the turn of the new year. He was a little bit later than that, but you guys get my point. So that difference is the hockey team. Now that Christmas trip that the Jazz always have right before and after Christmas is no longer just a few days. It's nearly an entire month away from home for the Utah Jazz. Hard to do. The converse of that, of course, is the Jazz will then have long home stands at some point, and maybe they win those. However, unfortunately, they play difficult teams in those. I went through the entire schedule, so the everydayers, thank you guys. You guys know who you are, have heard me break down the entire schedule at some point. But I'm not going to do that here. But I've given you the nitty-gritty of why the Jazz can or cannot overachieve. So they're home for an 8-game homestand, but it's not as long as duration, but it is the longest in terms of consecutive games played within the Delta Center that I can remember since being a fan. What this means to me, though, the hockey team coming to Utah means there'll be weariness on the road, and that's a factor earlier in the season as these trips are draining, and that means more rookie minutes, like I said. So maybe there will be overachieving individually, but I just don't see it turning into team success. That likely doesn't lead to winning, but it leads to internal improvement is the way I'd put it. I think you're going to see Cody Williams struggle initially and develop because he's going to play more minutes because they need him to, because the Jazz are going to play 10 players, and you're going to say, well, you know what? We're tired. We need to show what we have. And even if we win, it doesn't matter that much because we're truly not contenders. Therefore, Cody Williams, show us what you got. Bryce Sensabaugh, show us what you got. Taylor Hendricks, we want to see that you're the real deal and not theoretical. Show us what you got. That's what I think. Furthermore, the front-loaded schedule, I think, bodes poorly for the Jazz record-wise and would indicate the Jazz having their eyes set on the record being poorer sooner rather than later, meaning the Jazz have fought their way in a negative sense to getting the 9th and 10th pick the last 2 years. Yes, there was some luck or lack thereof with the ping pong balls on the lottery in May, but the Jazz were better than they wanted to be both of the last 2 years in terms of if they knew they were going to get the 9th or 10th pick, they probably wouldn't have wanted to start as well as they did either of the last 2 years. This year, I think the Jazz, the front-loaded schedule, meaning playing the enormous amount of excellent teams, and then that elongated road trip from October to December, means that the Jazz won't have enough wins to think about trying to win, and therefore they know that it behooves them to keep that top 8 protected pick from conveying to Oklahoma City, and the Jazz end up high in the lottery, especially with Cooper Flagg looming, and other players, not just Cooper Flagg. So I said this a few weeks ago. This was one of my premises of a previous podcast. The Jazz have 29.5 projected wins, which personally, I'd lean toward the under, though I don't offer this as gambling advice because I work for the NBA and cannot bet. The main 2 reasons, the Jazz play in the West, which features 13 teams with more than 36 projected wins. That's 7 wins more than the Jazz. And thus, the Jazz will be playing quality opposition nearly every night. Furthermore, the Jazz start the season playing 21 games, only one of which has an under 36 projected wins, the Bulls, and that is in Chicago, so the Jazz likely aren't projected to win. The Spurs are projected 36.5, and that's the lowest of any other. And the Jazz play them and a few teams on back-to-back, so consecutive nights. Every other team in the opening 21 games is projected to win 40 games, other than the Spurs and the Bulls. That means the Jazz will likely be on a fast track to the top of the lottery odds. Secondly, the Jazz, after that 21-game stretch of brutality, then play all of December on the road, but 2 games. Add all that together, and I think the Jazz end up with a top 5 draft pick. That's the way I feel about it. That's Leif Thulin's projection. Not saying that we're not going to overachieve individually. Like Keontae could have a great year, but I just don't think it amounts to wins for the Jazz. And those are the reasons why. I think the Jazz end up with about 21 wins. That's my projection. 21 to 23 wins. Coming up next, I'll talk about which Jazz man is most likely to be an Olympian in the 2028 Olympics. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always have exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All righty, welcome back to Locked On Jazz. Leif Thulin with you here, and here's a fun topic. I've seen some other hosts talk about this on Locked On Network, and I've just kind of thought about this because I'm a basketball nerd. And it's particularly interesting for the Jazz because the 2028 Utah Jazz want to be great. That is nearing the end of Lowry's extension, which is when the Jazz want to be in contention. And I've spoken a ton about how the draft and internal development, plus a move here and there, can get the Jazz to the point of contention. Doesn't mean the Jazz win a championship. We all hope they do. But good teams are the ones with representatives in the Olympics. So if the Jazz figure to have a chance to be one of the better teams because they have all those draft assets, they have Lowry Markkanen long term, they have Cody Williams, Keontae George, all these guys, and in 4 years from now that we hope to see develop and still be in the Utah Jazz uniforms, well, that means the Jazz could be a good team. So which of those guys is most likely to be a 2028 Olympian? Now, first, I think a lot of you guys are smart and would tell me, well, if the Jazz are truly contending and you've been saying Lowry probably isn't the number one guy, then maybe it's our number one guy, whoever we get in this draft or the next draft. Okay, so be it. That's fair, but I don't know who it's going to be. So maybe it's Cooper Flagg. Maybe it's Nolan Traore on France. Maybe it would be AJ Dibatsa 2 years from now, and he's on Canada. That's a fair point. And that's entirely possible that you end up being correct. But we'll go with who's on the Jazz right now. If Finland qualifies, then Lowry would be the obvious answer. You could say the same for Clarkson on Philippines, even if he's old at that point, but they don't have the depth of talent. But I'm going to talk about the Team USA. The team that I think is going to be very interesting to see how it's constructed. This last team was led by the elder statesmen, LeBron, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry. You saw Embiid and Anthony Davis step up at moments. You saw Devin Booker accept a role and excel at the 3-and-D role that Carmelo Anthony thrived in for years. Well, the majority of those guys I just named probably won't be on the 2028 team. I think there's a chance Booker is. I think there's a chance that Anthony Davis is. I think there's a chance that Anthony Edwards is. I think there's a chance that Bam Adebayo is. But you're not going to have Drew Holiday. You're probably not going to have Derek White. And those are the type of guys that I think are the most important to this discussion as it relates to the Utah Jazz. Those type of players are not the best players on their team. By the way, also Jason Tatum likely will be on the USA team then, and probably has a more featured role than he did. I'm just trying to think of numbers here. So the reason I want to focus on Holiday and White are I think a couple of the Jazz's players, the way I foresee them on a winning team, actually play similarly to the way that Drew Holiday and Derek White played for the Team USA. So my answer, I've plotted along here, but I'll give you an answer. The answer to my question of which Jazz player is the most likely to be on Team USA that is currently on the roster is Cody Williams. Do I think it's going to happen? Not necessarily. But what does Cody do well? He's got tremendous size for his position. He shot well in a small sample size. I think he can become a good shooter. He doesn't need the ball to make an impact. He proved that at Colorado. Has the ability to make plays for others. Could be a very, very good defender. Some people compare him to Jaden McDaniels. I don't know if I agree with that comparison, but I'm just saying body type wise, he could be a lockdown defender. He can play multiple positions, doesn't need the ball. There's also a chance that his brother, Jalen Williams, is on the team, and that makes it the appeal stronger. There's politics always involved, but I'm not saying that's the only reason. Cody, to me, in his best role, and this is my honest to goodness, hopeful truth, that the Jazz are contending by the 2028 Olympics. That would mean that Cody Williams, to me, is averaging about 14, 15 points a game, playing good defense, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, and he's the third best player on the team. You've got Lowry probably the second, and let's just say Cooper Flagg for sake of you guys probably know who he is as opposed to the nuances of other players' games. So you have Cooper Flagg as probably the best player, Lowry the second best player. Cody Williams would be the third best player on that team, and it could be a 15, 5-5 type of guy who plays excellent defense, knocks down open shots, is able to score, but doesn't need the ball in his hands a lot to be satisfied. He can play off the ball, can play good defense, hit open shots, and then if you give him the ball against a mismatch, he will expose that mismatch. That's my aspiration for Cody Williams and what I think he could do and why I was so high for him in this draft is I think he can do that role better than a lot of these guys that we said you're drafting this year. You're drafting a lot of guys that can help the guys as opposed to drafting the guys. What I mean by that is you're not drafting Anthony Edwards in this past draft. Zachary Risachet was the number 1 pick. I had Cody Williams as having higher potential than Zachary Risachet because I think he's more versatile. He can play with or without the ball in his hands and be a better athlete, explode to the rim more frequently and with more gusto. You know, he had a dunk all over somebody with his left hand in the summer league, and one of his main concerns was, can he get to the rim? Is he strong enough? Well, yeah, he's going to get better at those things. Risachet, I don't think, has that burst. And I'm not trying to disparage Risachet here, but that's consistent with my take. The reason I was so high on Cody Williams, I had him number 5, both before the draft and after the summer league. I did a redraft on exercise, and he was number 5 then too, because he played within himself in the summer league and looked very good doing so. He can play within himself and be a 15, 5-5 guy on a team that contends for a championship, hopefully, in the Utah Jazz. And that puts him in contention because you want those role players who excel at their role. And that's everyone wants to say, oh, 3-and-D are those type of players. Well, I think Cody Williams is the new version of a 3-and-D where you're not just shooting threes and playing defense, but you are a supplementary ball handler, a secondary ball handler, someone who can defend multiple positions as opposed to spotting up the quarter. And on defense, they can rest, let you shoot. That's the issue with McDaniels for Minnesota is you let him shoot, and if he beats you, so be it. That's the issue with Michael Porter Jr. in Denver. If he shoots, then you're screwed. But if you make him work on defense, and though he has gotten significantly better, you have the advantage. Cody Williams is like the two-way player, and that's why I think he's the only Jazz man on the roster right now that I think has a chance to contend for Team USA. You could say, oh, Kessler had a chance because he blocked shots. He could take the Tyson Chandler mold. I don't think so. I think there's better centers that are in a similar age range to him. You could say Keontae George, Colin Sexton. Keontae would have an interesting case, but I just think there's so many excellent guards. It's hard to have someone who likes the ball in his hands, and the same goes for Sexton, especially with neither of them being tremendous defenders. So I would take Cody Williams as the most likely to be an Olympian, other than if Lauri Markkanen and Finland make it. Or you could say Svi Mikhailuk, who's Ukrainian. If Ukraine were to make it, Svi Mikhailuk would be on the team. But let me know what you guys think about that. I think it's a fun little topic. And hopefully we end up being right. Hopefully Cody is that good of a player, and hopefully the Jazz are contending, and so he can be thrust into that spotlight as one of those beloved players like Derek White is now, because he was really good in San Antonio, but only in Boston's spotlight on a really good team has he gotten his flowers. So let me know what you guys think. You got to look at the stars now and see who supported them in recent years. And I think that's the type of player the Jazz would be able to put on the team unless they get themselves a Cooper Flag or some sort of all-world star. Thank you guys again for making Locked On Jazz your first listen today. And now go check out Locked On NBA podcast, where you can find the best coverage because the season never ends and they provide national expertise with a local perspective. You can find the link on Locked On NBA in the description, so you don't need to search for it. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Leif Thulin. Always a pleasure talking to you guys on Locked On Jazz. I'll be back Friday with Andy Larson on the episode talking more things Jazz basketball. Thank you, and as always, go Jazz.